Why do oppositions sometimes fail to strike when power is most vulnerable? Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to explore a question that appears again and again throughout history. Why do opposition movements sometimes exist, criticize those in power, hold rallies, give speeches, and yet seem strangely absent when the ruling system appears most vulnerable? At first glance, it makes no sense. There are opposition leaders. There are elections. There are public debates. There are endless political arguments. Yet, when a government faces what many citizens believe to be its greatest weakness, some opposition figures seem reluctant to focus on it. Instead, they deliver familiar speeches, repeat predictable talking points, and avoid the very issues that supporters believe could fundamentally challenge the system. Many frustrated citizens immediately reach an emotional conclusion. They're incompetent. They're cowards. They've betrayed us. But political psychology suggests that the answer may be more complicated. The real question is not whether individuals are brave or weak. The real question is, what incentives shape their behavior? Throughout history, scholars of authoritarianism have observed a fascinating pattern. Many regimes do not eliminate all opposition. In fact, some allow a certain amount of criticism. Why? Because complete silence can be dangerous. A government that appears to have no opposition at all may attract both domestic resistance and international scrutiny. As a result, many systems tolerate a level of controlled disagreement. Political scientists sometimes describe this phenomenon as controlled opposition groups that appear adversarial, but operate within boundaries that do not fundamentally threaten the existing order. Now, this does not mean every opposition party is fake, nor does it mean every political disagreement is staged, but it does raise an important psychological question. What happens when political survival becomes more important than political victory? Imagine you are an opposition leader. You look at the balance of power. You conclude that removing the ruling elite is extremely unlikely. What do you do next? Many people assume the answer is resistance, but human psychology often points in a different direction. The answer becomes adaptation. Rather than risking everything in a confrontation, they believe they cannot win. Individuals often learn to survive within the existing structure. Psychologists call this a form of institutional adaptation. The goal shifts from changing the system to finding a secure place within it. And once that shift occurs, behavior changes dramatically. Criticism becomes symbolic rather than transformational. Conflict becomes predictable rather than disruptive. The opposition may still speak loudly, but it avoids crossing certain lines. Why? Because survival has become more valuable than revolution. But there is another layer to this story. Power structures generally fear one thing above all else: unpredictability. A controlled critic can be anticipated. A genuine outsider cannot. From the perspective of an established political system, the most dangerous figure is often not a traditional opponent, but an entirely new challenger who refuses to play by existing rules. This is why new political movements often face resistance, not only from those in power, but sometimes from established opposition groups as well. The reason is surprisingly simple. They are competing for the same political space. When a disruptive movement appears, it threatens existing power holders, but it can also threaten established opposition elites who have built careers, influence, and institutional status within the current framework. Suddenly, the newcomer is not viewed as an ally. They are viewed as a rival, a competitor, someone who might replace both sides of the old political establishment. Political psychology tells us that human beings frequently prefer a familiar threat over an unpredictable one. An established rival may be dangerous, but its behavior is understood. A disruptive outsider introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is often what institutions fear most. This dynamic extends beyond politics. We see it in corporations. We see it in bureaucracies. We see it in organizations of every kind. Existing systems tend to tolerate criticism more easily than transformation. Why? Because criticism can be managed. Transformation cannot. That is why some of the most significant moments in history occur, when ordinary people suddenly realize that the conflict they have been watching for years, may not be producing meaningful change. The arguments continue, the speeches continue, the headlines continue, yet the underlying structure remains remarkably stable. At that moment, people begin asking a different question. Not, who won today's debate, but who benefits from keeping the game exactly as it is? And that question changes everything. The ancient wisdom of the East contains a fascinating observation. Often the truth does not suddenly appear in a dramatic moment. It was visible all along. The difference is that people were not ready to see it. History repeatedly teaches us the same lesson. The most important political battles are often not the visible conflicts presented on television screens. They are the invisible struggles over incentives, institutions, and power structures operating beneath the surface. When we understand those structures, political events that once seemed confusing begin to make sense. The goal is not merely to ask who is speaking. The goal is to ask who can act, who benefits from inaction, and who has the most to lose if the system truly changes. Those questions often reveal more about a political system than any speech ever could. If you found this analysis thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe, share this video, and join us as we continue exploring the hidden psychological forces that shape power, institutions, and political behavior around the world.